And this is the KDE Podcast Live. With a beautifully diverse panel of co-hosts, get ready for powerful and fresh perspectives of what it looks like to be a kingdom-driven entrepreneur. Let's go.
Hey there, everyone. So glad to be here. Somebody has echo. I'm not sure who. We'll play with it here in a minute. I hope you all are doing well. Listen, y'all see the tech in me? That's like, I hear something. My name is Latara Venice, and you are watching KDE Podcast Live, episode number 445. We are here with Joy, Brandon, and Phil, and we are glad that you are joining us if you're watching live or if you're watching the replay, or maybe you're listening on our podcast page or one of the podcast streaming services. We thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our craziness and our deep thoughts on all things kingdom and your business. So we are going to be talking today about suborder being an upgrade. What? Say what? That's going to be good. But let's start with how everyone has been. Joy.
Oh, Latar, you got me trained. Before I even came in here, I was like, I got to think, okay, what has been going on? Because she's going to ask that question. On the fun side, I would say it's been awesome to enjoy this Chamber of Commerce weather. Over the weekend, my husband and I explored another biking trail, a greenway here. And what was really unique about it was they actually thought this out and had restaurants and shops that were butted up against this bike trail that was going through a picturesque area with trees. It was beautiful. And then on the business side, I've got 2 workshops in the cooker, one for December and one for January. So the Lord has me busy.
Awesome. Love it. Brandon.
Yeah, last night, Amanda and I went with a friend to a Pittsburgh Penguins game here in Anaheim because whenever I lived in West Virginia, only lived about an hour from Pittsburgh. So still a Pittsburgh Penguins fan, and they won 2-0 last night. So that's always fun. Plus, got to see Sidney Crosby, Sid the Kid, score an empty net goal. And anytime you get to see one of the best players of all time, it's fun. And let alone when you see him score a goal. So that was
And did you say that was that hockey or soccer? Which one did you say? Hockey. Oh yeah, I don't know nothing you said. I didn't know the team name.
It's all right.
Go Penguins.
Let's go Pens.
Mr. Vines.
Yeah. So what's going on with me? What's new and good? I would say last week the wife and I got a chance to go through some wealth planning stuff. We got a chance to work through that. It was a 3-day event, and so we have the beginnings of our plan, and on this Friday we'll complete it. We'll have our meeting with the person. It's Jim from Wealth with God, right? We finally did our thing with him, and so that was pretty cool. And this Sunday we were on a podcast together, so I was spending a lot of time with Shay Bonds this weekend, and so yeah, we did a podcast together, and that was pretty cool. Cool experience.
Awesome. Well, I spent time with the grandbaby for a couple of hours, and actually they ended up here all day. Quite by accident, which I was loving, even though she was very delirious, because if a baby cannot get a nap, they don't take a nap. And when they don't take a nap, you got to understand they work a little different. And she would not sit down, she would not stop. Yep. I said, what is she? It was hilarious. It was great to have them here all day, even though it was quite by accident. Being able to spend time with her, yes, and even though they're only going to be here 2 more weekends, and I'm not happy about it, but okay, they kidnapping my grandbaby. That's okay. And that was good, So that was the highlight of my week. I love it. Love that opportunity. All right, so we are here to we've been talking about power dynamics, and we're still talking about power dynamics. And it's interesting. When I saw the word suborder, I will admit, Phil, I got a little bit, I was like, what he means suborder? Where he trying to put people at? Right? And I was like, I don't know how I feel about this suborder? And so I thought about it, and I was like, well, that's about submission, and it doesn't take you to a lower level, right? It's not what you're talking about here. So I'm really interested to learn more about suborder, which kind of made me, you know, and an upgrade. So let's
Yeah.
talk about that.
Well, I think by the time we get to the end of this, you might feel a little bit more comfortable about the sub order word. Okay. So we'll start with the scripture, and it's found in Luke 16:10 through 12. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest, dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? Right. And so that's the part that really popped out, from this with the suborder conversation, right? And so here's my setup for you. Being someone else's subordinate is a matter of stewardship in the kingdom. Frequently, even when God gives you your assignment, like he gives you your own assignment, he still puts you in a place to serve, right? And so that's the start of this conversation. And just from that, what are you thinking? You think I'm crazy? Does that not make sense? Does he put you in a place to serve or not when he gives you your own?
No, I don't think you're crazy, Phil. At least in this case. But no. So the example that I'm thinking of is so my wife Amanda, she's gotten into horseback riding over the last couple years or so, and at some point she wants to buy a horse in the future. But with her horse trainer, she's getting an opportunity. Her horse trainer's going through some surgery, so she and one of her other friends are going to be taking care of her trainer's horses while she's a little bit out of commission. So she's technically going to be, I guess, in that sub order piece because they're not her horses, it's someone else's property, but she's going to then level up because she's going to learn all of the things. So then ultimately when she would lease or purchase her own horse in the future, she's already going to be leveled up and much more prepared for that because she started with the sub order.
That's really good. You know what jumped out at me when you were talking, and I agree, you're not crazy, but what I heard was the emphasis that you made on someone else's property. And I think as business owners, as entrepreneurs, whatever role or hat you serve in the marketplace, we make the mistake of thinking that it belongs to us. We make the mistake of thinking what we're doing belongs to someone else, that maybe their name is on the paperwork for the business. But as Christ followers, it doesn't belong to anyone but God, right? So that's where we're supposed to be stewarding. That's where we're supposed to be doing things as to him, because he's the one that's ultimately in control, not us, someone else's property. It's his.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very astute.
Yeah, I agree. I'm starting to understand this already. I'm starting to understand a little bit about this sub order thing.
I mean, isn't that what it means to be a disciple of Christ, right? It doesn't say we're in charge.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good.
I'm in agreement. I'm in agreement. Yeah, it's like when I think about that, you brought out a spiritual aspect of this natural aspect as well, Joy. Like if we're not able to be a steward of someone else's, who would give you your own, right? It's like it's a precursor for how things work in the kingdom of God.
Mm,
Like if you can't be trusted helping to manage someone's stuff that you can see and you can see all the benefit that comes from it, how can I trust you with the spiritual things to manage?
mhm,
Spiritual responsibility over people's salvation and all the rest of that stuff that you can't see, right?
mhm.
If you can't do it in one, it's kind of hard to do it in the other, right? But anyways, so let's give a definition of suborder. Subdivision of an order. That's pretty straightforward, right? It's a subdivision of an order. It is also defined as a category in biological classification ranking, below an order and above a family. So as we get into this, right, that whole biological classification thing, you might remember it from high school, where you have domain, you have a kingdom, you have a phylum, you have class, you have order, you have family, genus, and a species, right? Right. And so what I saw in this, as I was thinking about and meditating on suborder, is that because God is always talking about the body, I believe that this is part of what he's getting at as well, right? If you can come into suborder versus having your own order, then you'll qualify for order, right?
Mm.
And before I get into the weeds of that, do you guys have any follow-up thoughts? Are you tracking with me when I brought it to the science, or am I bringing confusion?
I'm tracking with you when you go to science, but where you took me was back to, I think it was 10th or 11th grade biology, where we got to dissect a shark. And I was thinking about all the elements that came there, and all of a sudden I was back in that classroom. And by the way, not that it relates to this conversation in any way, but inside that shark we dissected, mine was pregnant, so it had babies. And so there was that whole, you talking about the different ranks, right? There was a whole dimension to my species that I was dissecting that went far deeper than we could ever imagine. That's where you took me.
I'm still thinking about the stewardship piece, and I think we could talk all day long about stewardship in general. And I think a lot of times people hear stewardship and instantly it's money, finances, and wealth, but it's beyond that. I mean, it's all areas of our life. So the one example that came to me, Phil, because you asked, especially with the stewardship piece, would you do it for one? I think, for example, creating content. I think that's a great example of, how are we able to steward our influence? Are we able to do it when no one's watching or only a few people are watching? Or are we only going to be consistent, again, assuming God is leading us in this direction, when we have this big, large following? It's like, well, if we can't steward the message that he's called us to share with others for the few people, well, how are we ever going to be trusted with the influence for thousands?
Oh, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mhm. That's
Okay,
good.
we just sit with that one.
Yeah, that's really good. And it takes suborder into a whole other direction too, because you mentioned money and not understanding that that's just one part of this thing. We have to steward our resources and all of them. And what does that look like? And and when you think of the word steward, right, there is a certain submission that comes with that as well too.
What, on that note, pulling on that thread, what came to mind for me was an analogy of a parent-child relationship, right?
Mhm.
Or with an employee that is working for somebody, or someone that you've hired as a contractor. When that child or that contractor shows you that they're capable of doing X, Y, and Z, and they do it well, then you feel like you have the freedom as the employer or as the parent to give them more responsibility. And isn't that really what the stewardship and subordinate piece is here? Is that when the father sees that we're doing good and well with what he's given us, not just burying it, the one talent in the sand, right? But we actually take action on it, that there's an opportunity for him to give us even more.
That's
Mm-hmm.
good.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So as I think about the parallels of this thing with the kingdom in this whole this science analogy, right? The domain, the kingdom, the phylum, the class, the order, the family, the genus, and the species. When you take a look at that, like it always starts the most broad, right? Domain is encompassing all the things, right? Then you have a kingdom, and then you have below the kingdom, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, right? When I think about this in the kingdom context, it's like this. Like when God calls us into service to him, right? Oftentimes we start on the opposite end of the spectrum. We have to learn what it looks like to be faithful to him for our own individual self, right? And as we grow, we become a little bit broader, right?
Mhm.
So I have to, okay, I confess that Jesus is my Lord and Savior. I have to walk that out with fear and trembling and figure out what that means for me to walk like that. That's like me being at the species level, right? And then after that, I might get responsibility over, let's say, a children's ministry. If I've shown myself to be faithful to follow Christ in my church situation, so now I'm over a ministry. or I'm let's say a team lead, right? And then the next step is, okay, as I show myself to be more faithful with that, I get another promotion, and I have a larger division that I'm looking over, right? All the way up the scale until you have your own, right? And so I feel like as we look at this thing, like coming into sub order is like that space just between, like, you become responsible enough to look over your family, for example. Let's say you're a parent, right? There's a certain level of responsibility you have to take once you become a parent, right? And so there's a certain level of stuff that God can give you as a parent that you can impart into your children. But when it's time to have a greater impact, it's like going to that next level, which is order. Then he starts to give you responsibility over like movements or things of that nature, right? But you can't get to that just going from family to movement. You need that in between. You need that sub order. You need to be able to come underneath someone else and learn how they do it. It's the same for every step, right? Before I became the head of a ministry at my previous church, I was one of the first. I was just a volunteer, right? And as I showed myself to be faithful as a volunteer, eventually the director of the ministry tapped me on the shoulder and be like, "I need you to be a leader. This is how I want you to lead." Right? Okay, so I'm in the ministry underneath her. Then she got a promotion. She got multiple ministries. So then she's like, "I need you to come over to this ministry, and I need to elevate you a little bit more." And then eventually she tapped me on the shoulder and be like, "Okay, I'm leaving. I need you to take over this ministry." But I never would have gained the experience that I needed to even be considered to take over the ministry if I hadn't come underneath her first, right? Who's going to give you your own if you can't be faithful with another's, right? And so that, I think that's part of it, right? So when I'm talking about the sub order, it's like before you have the type of impact to go out and reach the world, right? Instead of just your block, your family, or even your neighborhood, you're going to have to find your place, find a space where you get a chance to come underneath someone else's tutelage, so that you know the things that you need. Because actually, that's God doing a benefit to you. He's giving you a service. He's giving you a solid. Before you have to put yourself on the line, he's giving you a place to operate and learn the ropes. But what do y'all think about that? Am I talking crazy talk? Am I getting ahead of myself?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I think about Jesus and the disciples, like a perfect example. And I'll give a funny example too here in a minute. I just thought of something, but it's a perfect example because they didn't just come and he sent them out two by two. They had to train, they had to learn, which means they had to sit at his feet. They had to be willing to sit at his feet. And the thing is that they also had to believe in the message he was bringing, right? And that's important too, because you got to be careful who feeds you so that you don't even believe in their message just because they got a certain position, right? I actually had a conversation with someone who told me in a session that she was working with a coach. She said, now she's not giving me, like, what she's telling me is not in alignment with what I'm doing, but because of who she is, that's why I'm still paying her. I was like, that don't make no sense. That's crazy. Right. And so that just, if you don't believe in it, then, and it's not in alignment, why are you there? And where the disciples were, it was in alignment. They all knew that that the chosen one was coming. The Messiah was, they knew he was coming. And they knew it was Jesus when he called them. Even Doubting Thomas knew that's the Savior. Let me go sit with him for a while. And none of them, I don't think, really had the expectation of being sent out two by two. They just wanted to be at Jesus' feet. They weren't looking to be, Peter, not maybe. They weren't looking to be,
Play the political game.
Yeah, they weren't looking for that. They just wanted to be with Jesus because they knew it was a privilege and an honor to be with him. And as humble as he was, they understood who he was, just as he understood who he was, right? And here's another example. For years, I wouldn't cook my mama's greens. Y'all would not cook greens. I love collard greens. And I would cook. I tried once. I was like, these taste like water. I don't understand. I want to do this. And so I had to go and ask my mom, how do you cook your greens? What is that like? And she began to kind of tell me some things. And I watched some of my favorite chefs and learned a little secret from one of my chefs, Robert Irvine. Love him, love him, love him. And I cooked a pot of greens one day and I was like, oh, these are my mama's greens. But I had to sit and learn from her. Same thing with her peach cobbler, same thing with her sweet potato pies. I was intimidated, but if I just asked, then I would learn, right? And so that was the funnier example, but it was a perfect example too.
Yeah, and I think you guys have both shared several examples of the sub order and when it works out the way that God has intended for us. Because I think, Phil, you said something to the effect of God knows that we need that. So I think an example that I thought of where sub order isn't followed and how it doesn't work out near as well, lottery winners. I forget this specific statistic, but the amount of lottery winners that end up going bankrupt is relatively high. I mean, even people that are getting hundreds of millions of dollars end up going bankrupt or maybe even in a worse off position than before because there's not a suborder there. They weren't necessarily good stewards with the little money they had at the beginning. And then now all of a sudden, more wealth just didn't make them good stewards. In fact, it probably just amplified the problems that they already had because essentially there's all these steps were skipped. And I experienced the same thing in dealing with clients who receive an inheritance, not quite like the lottery, but similar in concept. And the mindset is just so much different because they weren't necessarily good stewards to begin with. And again, as much as we would love to think that, oh, when I get that house, when I get more money, when I get that new car, I'll take better care of insert thing here, we probably won't, because if we aren't faithful and steward the little things, the quote unquote little things, however you want to define little now, well, you're probably also not going to be stewarding if you even get more, right?
The question that keeps running through my head is, what about, I mean, we know that this is what we're called to do, but what about those of us that completely ignore this order to be subordinate? What happens to the Christian or the kingdom minded business owner that is stagnant and doesn't take action on being subordinate and doesn't go through the ranks and doesn't allow this maturity to happen? What happens with that?
They stay stagnant. I mean,
it's sad.
Yeah, I was going to say they wind up spinning their wheels, right?
Right.
Right? Because I meant part of this is you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so God knows that you don't know what you don't know. So he places you in positions that will help you know or help you know what to look for,
Right.
when you step into the fullness of your call, right?
Right.
That's a big part of it. Like, so if I was using this ranking system in taxonomy, right, I would classify the rank of order as the rank in which God begins to magnify impact beyond your natural or your usual relational influence, right? So people that actually know you, like you, love you, I would put that as family, right? But when you're graduating to that place of order, you're going into spheres of influence where people don't necessarily know you. So they don't know you, so they don't know if they like you, right? But you're going to need to come into that space producing something that God has already called you to produce. But if you have to walk from the familiar and walk instantly into that space, then you're going to need some type of guidance. Sometimes the Lord will lead you himself, right? He can direct your path, and he can give you people and say, hey, I want you to keep an eye on this person. But he never actually have you go and serve underneath them. But he's teaching you something. He's giving you something in advance, right? And then you're going to have to be, I think we talked about this in the last conversation. Then you're going to have to be like that pathfinder or that trailblazer yourself, right? You have to be a trailblazer. Well, not everybody's called to be a trailblazer, right? So if you're not called to be a trailblazer, sometimes he'll give you something and you have the ability to go off of the back of someone else's work, and it shortens your time. And I might be getting ahead of myself. Maybe that's the next one. I don't know. But the bottom line is he puts you in position so that you can learn all the things that you don't know already before the time that you actually need to know it, when the stakes are higher, right? when if it doesn't go right, it's going to crush you, right? And so
That's deep. He puts you in position. Somebody needs to catch that, because so often, we want to catapult right to the top, but you're not ready for that. It's just like someone, and I'm quite sure Brandon can catch me here. It's like someone who they want to earn six figures, but they can't adequately take care of the five figures. They don't steward it well. So you're gonna do the same thing with the six figures and the seven figures. And now I saw a book where they're talking about nine figures. And so that we got this hype about all this money we want to have, but can you take care of that money? Can you? I want to make five figures a month. Well, what are you doing with the four figures you make a month? What are you doing with that? Are you honoring it? Are you stewarding it well? You know, because I can tell you from experience, if you're not stewarding it well, it's going to come back and bite you. It's going to come back and bite you. Now, sometimes it's, some people say, oh, the devil, the devil. Sometimes there is an attack there. But oftentimes it's you, because you're not properly stewarding it. But if you don't learn that, I remember when Shay had me do my first profit and loss sheet. I thought Shay was crazy. No, cash flow. And I said, I don't have no cash to flow. So what am I doing this for? She said, well, if you do it, then you'll have cash that will flow. Okay. She said, I don't care if it's $25, if it's $100. Take that and fill that cash flow sheet in. And over time I learned. And then it became so ingrained in my head that I could skip doing the cash flow one week and go, oh, well, I already know what's coming out of my bank account. I know what's coming out here. I know all of that. It grew, right? And then as I grew, I ended up meeting somebody I'm in a relationship with who is a financial advisor. And he was like, yeah, so now we got to do this. We got to do this. We got to do this. And I was like, I don't want to do all of that. But had I not listened, right, then I would have been paying an even bigger tax bill this year, which I didn't. I didn't. I had to actually submit to him taking over my taxes. And I was like, I got a tax person already. Well, yeah, but you're paying too much in taxes. So they don't know what they're doing. Give me, let me handle that. I don't want you handling my stuff. Right. And so, but that's what happened. I've grown in this financial thing, and no, this hasn't been the best financial year for me, but I still know what's coming out, when it's coming out. Right. And if a payment don't hit from a client, what's going to happen? Like, oh, this coming through, Lord, what we doing? I get it. I got it now. I know how to steward that much better. So I had to start from the bottom with a cash flow sheet, then profit and loss. And she was like, do 3 months. I was like, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed. She said, start with 30 days. Okay, I can do that. And then she worked me up to where she said, okay, you can do a whole year now. A whole year? But I did it.
Right.
Right? I did it because it doesn't mean I can't go back and course correct or change some things around as money shifts or whatever happens. But I had to start somewhere. I had to start somewhere. And I didn't get six figures last year, but I was really close to it. But I knew how to steward that dollar.
Yeah. And humility is, I think, an underlying key to that entire story too. Right? You could have just let your pride get in the way, Latara, and say, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't have any cash to flow at this point. But instead you were humble. And I also love the second piece, even on Shay's advice of, okay, well, instead of making it this huge, big, long project of 12 months or 3 months, start with the 30 days. Because I think as entrepreneurs, we can easily get overwhelmed from an optimal perspective. Sure, it's better to have a 12-month cash flow. But guess what? If you don't do anything, having 30 days is the start. Maybe start with 1 week. Again, we're specifically talking about cash flow here, but that could be with anything. Because I think when we don't break things down into smaller steps, we then just get ridiculously overwhelmed, like you were mentioning, Latara, and there's a higher likelihood that then we don't do anything. And now we're not stewarding anything because we're just, oh, it's not perfect, I can't do it. It's like, well, that's worse off than just taking that next step.
Yeah.
Steward that next thing right in front of you. No matter how small you think that is, it starts small.
It matters.
I like to say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right?
Yeah.
Good stuff. All right. It is time for a break. When we come back, we're going to keep talking about this sub-order stuff. I know Phil got some more yumminess. So we're going to take a break and hear from our sponsors.
world, trust is our most valued currency. And the secret to building that trust? Resonating deeply with our audience, the needs and desires. Many of my clients and I have been where you are now, knowing you have value to offer, but unsure how to communicate it. That is why I created the Resonate Offers Guide. It's the culmination of my 12 plus years journey as a business coach and a KDE certified strategist, designed especially for us, Kingdom entrepreneurs. The guide will reveal how to design offers that resonate and attract your best clients, so you can finish 2023 with unmatched clarity and ready to shine in 2024. And because I believe this transformative power, I'm offering this guide for free for a limited time. Just go to kdbottle.com/resonate. Join me, let's lead, resonate, and build trust that propels our business to new heights.
All right, we are back, and I'm going to just turn this right on over to Phil.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, so we'll get into, well, how does this apply, to this whole suborder being the key to upgrade? All this stuff that we've been talking about about the suborder, right? And so let me give you a scenario. Here's a scenario. God gives you a promotion to the classification called order, right? He gives you a complete vision of your next, but you are led to submit to someone else. You can tell it is higher than your previous rank, but it is not what you were thinking was going to happen, right? It's not the fullness of what God showed you. What do you think is happening in that scenario, right? So let's give it a different name. I said it's order, right? It's called order, but let's say it like this. He's called you to be, he said, I'm going to make you the next, let me pick somebody that is a talk show host. Let's see. I'm going to make you the next Oprah Winfrey, right? He's giving you a vision for this greatness, right? And you're like, oh, God's going to make me the next, right? He's going to give me this platform and all the rest of that stuff, right? And soon after he says that, you don't get access into being the next, right? Instead, you find yourself being directed towards an assistant role, right? And it might not even be like the executive producer or something like that. It might be the bottom of the ring, bottom of the rung, right? And so he's put you in that position. What do you think happened? Did you hear from him wrong? Probably not. Are you living beneath your abilities or your privileges? Probably not, because in that moment you can tell that I have access to more than I had before. It's not the fullness of the picture he gave me, but it is more, right? So what happens a lot of times is people get frustrated in those scenarios. They get frustrated in that situation because it's not what God showed me. But he didn't want to crush you. If he gave you what he showed you and he knew you couldn't handle it, it would crush you. It would crush you, boo. But let's talk about that. What do y'all think?
Well, I think Tarika in the comments, she kind of pointed to it. She was talking about being apprentice, right? And what you're talking about is a form of apprenticeship where the Lord takes you through the different steps that you need from the beginning to be able to get to where you're going. And I love what's on the screen there. Do you see being an apprentice as a sort of gift? It's helping us build that capacity without a doubt.
That's it right there.
I mean,
Oprah, on the head.
Oprah didn't become Oprah overnight. She started at the very bottom and she had a lot of things she had to do to build her way up to that. And then she was at the right place at the right time. And those different experiences that she had, we've all watched her journey over the years. Look at where she is now, but she wasn't always there. She was definitely working her way to the top.
That's good.
Phil, I like that question that you asked, even in this kind of scenario of you're called to be the next Oprah Winfrey and you get this assistant role of some sort. Like, do I have more access than I did before? Because I think sometimes we don't take a moment and be intentional to actually look back to see where we've been. Because if we're always just focused so much on the future and even so much on the vision that God's called us to, we can almost make that an idol and forget how far we've truly come. Like it was just over the past week, I was sitting down and actually looking at some of my P&L nerdy financial stuff, but I actually don't mind it. So it's kind of fun for me. But anyways, but I was being intentional with that. And I looked and I compared it to the previous year. I was like, whoa, like it doesn't feel like there's been an increase. And is it as much as I would like it to be? Transparently, no. And that's okay. But still, it was insightful because it's like, wow, like God has brought me so far over the last 12 months. And if we don't ever stop, be intentional and be grateful for those things, we're almost not going to see that we are actually on the path. And I do have more influence than I did a year ago. And again, back to that same example. Oh, I might not have had access to some of these people to be in some of these meetings and these conversations. And then maybe the next year, that person gets promoted and has even more access to the right people, to Joey's point of being, and then God having us in the right place at the right time, for us to then become that quote unquote overnight success.
Yeah.
The analogy that comes to mind for me has to do with scuba diving. I know you're surprised at that. And the scenario is that when you want to dive, when you're like, hey, I want to dive, you have to go through all these different training courses, and they don't immediately say, okay, you've got a desire, we're going to say you're a certified diver, go have fun. You have to go through a lot of training and work your way through that process. And then it doesn't just stop there. I mean, there's different levels of that training, all the way up to, the dive master and all the different things that they can do, and the rescue divers. And with each one of those levels of certification, there's lots of hours of training and lots of practice so that you can become comfortable to dive in and do the things that you have been dreaming about doing. Anyway.
Joy, what would happen if someone got that out of order? They have almost no experience, or that are at a really low level, and they jump to something that they're not capable of?
The potential is great that they could physically harm themselves or lose their lives. And sadly, I've encountered some people when they've talked, oh, you like to dive, I'll go with you. And then I learned that they don't have their certifications, or maybe they're getting someone to get them tanks when they're not even qualified to get it. And I won't go with them, because when you come alongside somebody else that doesn't have the proper training, then I'm also putting myself at risk, right? And it's going to bring me down. And I think that that's what happens, or could happen potentially, when we are doing what God has called us to do. If we don't align with the right people, with the right things, it could potentially pull us down as well. So
that's good.
That's so good. Yeah. So I would say then, that when God gives you an opportunity to be someone else's subordinate, he's really giving you a head start, right? You don't know what you don't know. He's putting you in position to obtain the knowledge, the wisdom, and hopefully, if you're continuing on, the understanding for your next. Right? But so often we don't look at it that way. We look at it like, well, God showed me this, and this is the challenge sometimes when you're too focused on favor, right? God has given me favor. And so you're looking for favor to take you to places that your capacity can't bear. Sometimes God will take you to places through favor that your current capacity can't bear, but he's going to make up the difference really quickly, right? He can do it in suddenly, right? But actually, chances are your capacity was already there. You've just been living underneath your capacity.
Yeah.
But this is the challenge. If you're not willing to come underneath someone else, then you're not going to grow in your capacity. And if you need more capacity to pull off that next level, as soon as you get into it, let's say you kick the door down and be like, God showed me this is where I'm going to go, and I'm finagling things. And so now here, I found someone that's willing to give me this position. And you step into that position, and you're not going to last very long because you don't have the capacity to operate in it. So if you bypass, like Brandon was bringing up, if you bypass the necessary process, the necessary steps, you might get to upgrade, but you're not going to stay at upgrade. You're going to be downgraded immediately and maybe past the place where you were last, right? So the key to that upgrade is actually putting yourself in a position to serve someone else's mission, serve someone else's vision, wherever God placed you. Serve in the capacity that you have to serve. That's like sowing seeds, and you will be prepared for when you walk into your own.
That's good. I love this. And as you're talking, I'm instantly thinking about entrepreneurs because as you were talking, I'm thinking, okay, so as an entrepreneur, then how does that apply to me in business, right? Because I run my business. I run my business. I own this thing. This my baby. I own this. But I think it's really important that we understand, that's the power of mentorship. And and I remember when my mentor, my very first mentor year, she's been gone since 2002, and I met her in 90, let's see, AJ started 92. And I remember when we started our relationship, and this is going to apply right to business. When we started our relationship, and I didn't want to I didn't want to talk to her. So she would call me and she would say, "Hey, how are you?" And I would go, "I'm good, but I can't talk right now." And I would hang up, right? And then she would call me, and she would hear me and I would just cry because I really needed her and didn't know I needed her. And I would just sit and cry and she would just listen to me cry, then I would hang up. And then eventually we built a relationship to such a point to where, people used to call me Little Nancy. Now she was only 4'11". That's it. She was 4'11". If you know me, I'm 5'8". I'm a tall girl. And it would be the most hilarious thing when they would call me Little Nancy. But after a while, I began to receive them like, okay, well, whatever you think, because I would watch her relationship with the Lord, even while she was going through her cancer battle. And I would just watch her and I would watch her, and she was submitted to the Lord. And I wanted to be that person, right? And so oftentimes as an entrepreneur, we look at someone and we want to be that person. And so instead of like we want to be like them and we want to, emulate them, and we should never want to be like anybody. We are who we are. But there's something that they have, right? Like I didn't like Shay, but I knew, just like I didn't like Nancy, but I knew I needed them, right? And so when she had that offer for Igniters, I was like, do I do this? And just immediately I was like, I want this. I want this. Still didn't like her, but God had told me she's going to mentor you. And I was like, I had a mentor like that since Nancy. I don't know what Nancy been gone since 2002. I don't need no mentor because that's where I was. But I needed that and didn't really understand at the time. It took time. I grew again into this and needing it as an entrepreneur, realizing, you know what? We're on the same path. We're on the same path. We were parallel because she was a little bit further ahead than I was, right? And that's what's so important as entrepreneurs. We have to understand that we need other people. This is why, again, I can't stand that term solopreneur. I cannot stand it because it isolates you, right? And we can't afford to be isolated, especially kingdom-driven entrepreneurs. If you're kingdom-driven, you're community-driven. You are collaborative. What does that look like for you? And that doesn't mean you always being, I volunteer here a lot for events. And people will say, well, do you want to speak from the stage? No, I just want to run your registration table. Let me greet the people. That's it. That's all I want to do. And I did this one girl's event for the longest time until she finally was like, I would love to have you on the team. And then we were in a meeting and she said, you should really be speaking from the stage. I didn't ask for that. But because I suborder, I said, I just want to be at the registration table, wherever you need me to be, whatever you want from me. It was the same thing with Shay, right? I really need you to be one of our first mentors because this is growing. I can't be the only one doing it. Well, guess where I have been? At her feet for what? At that time, 12 months. At her feet, learning, right? And then she was like, okay, I think it's time to elevate you to team lead. Team lead? I don't want to do that. Now, mind you, I wasn't looking for none of this. I knew it was coming. And then she was like, 6:30 in the morning on my phone in Voxer. I've been having this conversation with the Lord, and I think that it's time that, that you're going to become director of coaching. Girl, you done lost your mind. And it happened so fast. I wasn't looking for it, but I stayed at this level where I was just like, I just want to learn. And then in the interim, my business grew. because I submitted to somebody else's business. I still do it with KDE. I still do it at any time. I could go, I don't want to do this no more. I got a business. I don't need you. It's crazy to have this position and then be a CEO of a company. But it works. When you are in that sub order, key to upgrade, we talking about sub order, is a key to upgrade. It's been a powerful experience.
And I think even what you just brought up there, Latar, that could be a challenge to some entrepreneurs, whether they identify as a solopreneur or not. It's they're the boss in their own business. They're the ones that are calling the shots. So what does then that look like to put pride on the shelf and be humble and get into that sub order in another organization, whether that's in an official capacity or a volunteer role, or again, whatever that looks like? Because I think we might have talked about this a few weeks ago, but we're not. A lot of us as entrepreneurs, we're probably leaders, potentially in other organizations as well. But there's going to be certain organizations where we're not called to be in a leadership role. We might be there to simply serve, or maybe even some organizations just simply receive. And I think if we have a really hard time with this sub-order concept, and again, we want to be the boss all the time, then that's going to be challenging, because then we're going to get things all out of whack.
Yeah.
No, the thing that came out of the story that Latara shared is willingness to serve, right? Willingness to serve and show up, even when you don't want to, because that was a resounding theme. I kept hearing, I don't want that. I don't want to do that. I don't like that person. That was the resounding thing, but she still took steps forward. She was willing to do that. You know, the disciples, I see the word disciples just flashed across the bottom of the screen. The disciples, they were willing to follow Jesus. They were willing to put their nets down and be able to say, okay, we're going to go and see what he's all about and see how we can help him and further that mission. And then look what happened to them. Here we are all these thousands of years later talking about the disciples and the lessons that we can learn from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so good. Like when I think about this, this is really God doing what he says he does. He gives seed to the sower, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's giving you something that you can sow into someone else's, right? But what happens when you sow? You expect a harvest. A harvest is coming, right? And so, like, if you learn how to be subordinate to someone else, guess what? You're going to have abundance of people that will learn how and know how to be subordinate to you when you need it, right? He's growing our capacity in a variety of ways all at once, right? But sometimes we get so focused on the destination that we miss the goodness that's in that process, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, when God calls us to our next, we are qualified, but there are levels to our readiness, right? So when God calls you, you're qualified. You hit the minimum requirement to be qualified.
Mm-hmm.
But that don't mean that you're fully ready. There's levels to this. And so he's trying to give you your readiness. And so he will put you in a position where you can work out your readiness in that safe space. Right? But we have to see it as that, right? I think the challenge is always, how we're seeing things, our perspective, and how we're thinking and processing things. It's our mind, right? But if we can understand that this is really a key to upgrade, being able to be a subordinate, then we can move into the fullness of the capacity that God has for us. I think about the centurion soldier, right? When he needed Jesus to do something for him, and he said, and Jesus said, "Oh, okay, I'm coming." And he said, "No need. I'm also a man under authority. I'm under authority, so I know how this works. All you have to do is speak a word, and your subordinates will go and make this thing happen." Right? When we learn how to operate under authority, because guess what? He said, "I'm a man under authority," but that meant that he's also in authority, right? Because if he knows this is how it works when I speak to my subordinates, there's a level that's above me as well, right? But I am under their authority, and I speak to this person, and the full power that their authority carries helps me to speak to this person and know that they're going to follow through. Well, that's how it is in the kingdom of God. If we can get this whole sub-order thing, And we recognize that it's not even about the person that we're serving. It's inevitably about who they're serving and who they're serving, and eventually all the way up to King Jesus. Then it doesn't matter what position we're in, because we know that we're ultimately serving the one that has all power in his hands.
Yeah, that's good. It took me right back to we talked about this last week, the washing of the feet. You know, Peter was like, yeah, you ain't, don't you will not have no part of that. Jesus was like, well, if you don't, then basically you don't belong to me. Well, wash all of it, Jesus, my hair, everything. He began to understand in that moment that wow, wait a minute, a part of sitting at his feet is allowing him to serve me. So Jesus showed this example, as well. And we have to understand, this is where you have to understand that it's not about necessarily hierarchy, right? Like we talked about being generals in the army of the Lord before we came on. Right? This term general that so many people use. Why are you using the word general? Ain't no generals, right? But what happens, within, in the religion, the religious mindset of people is we place we take the term suborder and we make it about, it's almost becomes like a term of enslavement, and that's not it. We're not enslaved, we're free, right? And even Phil, when you shared the where it says, okay, so the rank goes domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genius, and species, that just talks about alignment and where you belong in the kingdom. It doesn't mean you're higher than anyone else. Right? And so as you guys were talking, this is what I was thinking, like, wow, this is just about learning that I'm getting in alignment. One of the reasons Nancy had to mentor me was because I had a strong sense of wisdom. My gift of wisdom is a true anointing. And I'm like, whoa, but I didn't understand how to use it at the time. And Nancy was a very wise individual with great discernment. And when you have wisdom, you need discernment. I was lacking on that discernment piece a little bit. And so I needed that. And I also need to learn how to love effectively, because I didn't know how to do that either. So we've got to understand there's an importance to this suborder thing, and we do ourselves a disservice when we think that it doesn't matter. I don't need nobody. Once Nancy died, I didn't think I'd never have another mentor. To be honest, I didn't want one.
Yeah, that's so good. So every new rank, every new level has a potential sub role, right? That allows you to see and touch your next before you carry the weight. So, like, you need to just think about that. Like, every time you have an opportunity to serve, it's an opportunity to be able to touch and experience your next before you have to carry the weight. So even if you mess up with what you're doing, it's not going to hit. It's not falling on your shoulders. It's falling on the shoulder of the one that's above you. And guess what? They're prepared to be able to carry that weight. I'm prepared to carry as CEO of Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur. When I give responsibility to anybody on the team, a lot of times it might be the first time that they're handling it, right? And if it falls flat, am I looking at them like, oh, you got to carry the weight of this? No, it hits Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur, and ultimately it'll hit me. If we don't make any money, who's going to go without pay? Probably if the person's a good leader, it's the person that is in leadership role. They're not going to pass it down to the subordinates, right? And so I'm saying, as kingdom leaders, right, a lot of times we're going to carry the weight of the thing that we give to our subordinates. So it's a blessing to be in that second position sometimes, because you get to touch it. Even if you make a mistake, you're not going to feel the full brunt of it, right? But if we don't look at it right, if we don't look at it from the proper angle, we're not gonna get that, and we're gonna miss the blessings that God is trying to bring our way. When God calls us to our next, we are qualified, but there are levels to our readiness. Being under someone's tutelage is a blessing because you get to test drive your next in advance. You get to test drive your next in advance. The practice that you get from that test driving shortens your learning curve. And when your learning curve is shortened, that could also shorten the time that you would have to remain at that level, right? So let's say, for example, Latara, she decided to submit to or come under the suborder of Shay Bynes. A lot of the stuff that Latara is called to walk in to now, it looks similar to some of the stuff that Shay Bynes has been called to walk in. And the time period that she has to learn is shortened because she submitted and she sowed seeds towards it. So she's getting a more rapid return, right? She got to practice, she got to test drive. And so her time in this level is going to be shortened, right? And if it goes down enough, if we go down enough levels, eventually you're shortening the people underneath you time to the point where it's not going to be uncommon for them to zoom past you because you've given them the stuff that they need, right? And they can zoom past. But at the same time, if they really receive the impartation that they were supposed to receive, they're not going to zoom past you. You're going to be like, oh, you allowed me to catch up. So now let me support you and help you catch up. Let me help promote you as well, right? But anyways, it's a cyclical thing. But I digress. What do y'all think?
I just had a whole image of when Jesus was carrying the cross and he began to get tired and the gentleman came, because in that moment I was like, he was being our subordinate in that moment because he was going to give himself up for us, right? And here comes someone who soldiers could have been like, don't help him, get away, but they didn't. They allowed him to help him to carry the cross because he couldn't take the weight at that moment, right? That's some powerful stuff. And there have been times I remember when I didn't like Shans before Igniters, and when Antonina left and she had to take her little break, and she asked me to run the group, and I was like, sure, I'll do it. I was already kind of, in there messing with folks anyway when they would be going against stuff, and I'd be up in there telling people about themselves. And it was only because I love the message of kingdom-driven entrepreneur. And so in that moment, I stepped into something. I didn't even know then she was going to be my mentor. Y'all catch what I'm saying? But she couldn't carry the weight of running the group and then needing to take a break at the same time. Mm. So I just had that whole image of that gentleman carrying the cross, helping Jesus to carry the cross, to take on the weight. Mm.
Anybody got something before I jump back in here?
Yeah, I think even on the suborder piece, we've been talking the most of the time today about when we're kind of we'll call it the mentee in some of these relationships. I think too we've got to be really mindful when we are the mentor to what you guys just brought up, when we have to be okay if we're leading, if we do create that foundation and someone goes quote unquote beyond us, because again, what does going beyond us actually mean? It's, if we're all in our own unique callings, then is someone actually quote unquote beyond us? But maybe that's a different conversation for a different time. But if we're really called and loving on these people, we also have to set our pride aside and be humble and genuinely want someone to succeed in their own God-given calling, even if it means that their business does more revenue, they end up having more followers, or some of these other worldly metrics. And I think we've got to constantly remind ourselves, because there's not competition in the kingdom. Right? Like currently I'm leading a mastermind of other advisors and teaching them how to do or launch a new business model that I've recently launched. Now, from the outside, someone might be saying, well, Brandon, why are you doing that? You're literally creating competition for yourself. But there's not competition in the kingdom. We're all called to serve different people. Mm-hmm. Right? So who am I to say, oh, I'm going to hoard every single person needs to work with me and go through my model? That would be ridiculously arrogant. Mm-hmm. And just, right? So I can't have that mindset. It has to be, how can I support? And there could be people that create models that go way above and beyond from an impact or even revenue perspective. But I have to be okay with knowing, hey, this is where I'm called in this particular season as kind of the mentor in that particular example. So that's a constant reminder for myself too, preaching to myself on this one.
That's good. That's good. This has been such a yummy conversation. Phil, what else do you have before we It's good.
Okay, so this is my final take home point, right? The pace of a trailblazer is measured, but the marked. Let me say it again. The pace of a trailblazer is measured, but a marked out course hastens the pace of the pathfinder. You know, so like when you've been made a steward, um, you are allowed to become someone that finds a path that's already been laid out for you. So like everybody don't want anyone to tell them what to do. They want to be a trailblazer, but know this: if you're going to be a trailblazer, your pace is going to be measured. It's going to take some time because if you're going too fast, you might go off a cliff, right? But if you are allowing yourself to be wherever God places you, and let's say He places you in the role of being subordinate, guess what? All you have to be responsible for now is to find a path that's already been marked out,
Mhm.
right? And as you find that path, you can move faster. Oh, yeah, I see. This is where I'm leading. You can look further ahead and see where you're going, right? And so your pace is hastened. So once again, I say that this being a subordinate is really a head start, right? And if you see it that way, you'll be able to flow in all the yumminess and the goodness of the kingdom.
Yes, so good. This was such a great conversation, and really, I'm gonna be sitting on this for a while. This has been a great conversation about power dynamics, and I believe we have a couple of more conversations around power dynamics and coming up. And I'm super excited. Listen, you guys, we're gonna be live every Wednesday this month, even the day before Thanksgiving. We'll be live. We will be live. So, y'all make sure that you join us. Everybody should be the day before Thanksgiving. If you cooking, just turn it on. Just turn it on and listen. Like I tell Shay Bynes, turn it on and flip your phone over.
Maybe Latara will even give you her greens recipe. Who knows?
I might, you never know. I might tell you how to cook a good pot of collard greens, right? Right? I might because I've learned a few things. That's a part of the upgrade. You learn how to put a couple of extra things in there to make it better. Nothing super, bad or whatever, but just to give it a little bit more flavor and taste. So this has been great. This has been good. You guys, this was just a great conversation. And we want to thank you all for joining us. Listen, we're going to see you all next week, but do us a favor and share this episode out. Share this with somebody. Let somebody know that we are here. Share this on your social media platform. Say, hey, go watch this. Go take a listen to this. If you're listening on our podcast page, share that out too. Let people know that we are here. We appreciate you. We love you all. We will see you all next week.